We are next going to talk about workflows and the supply chain in operating in a more sustainable way. And here we have Kristen Bullitt, who is our moderator. Kristen is CEO of Humans Not Robots, who specializes in adjusting workflows and supply chains for a sustainable media workflow. So with that, Kristen, are you ready to go?
All ready. Can you hear me, Barbara?
I can. Take it away.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Barbara. Good to see everybody. As Barbara said, I'm Kristen, CEO and co-founder of Humans Not Robots. I have a long background in media and broadcasts. I've built some of the very early first generation OTT platforms for people like Sky and Channel 4 in the UK and Liberty Global across Europe. So I've worked extensively with tier ones, helping them with their workflows and cloud transformations. And I've lived and breathed that evolution of today's media supply chain. And the media supply chain is a key part of all our technical operations. And it's in fact the engine room of media and broadcast companies. And today, reasonably, production's been a bigger sustainability consideration, followed by other physical aspects of the business. And when it comes to the media supply chain, I'm sure everyone in this room knows what their respective technology and operational costs are. And with those costs also comes the sizable carbon footprint and energy burden. Scope 3 emissions, they're not only very challenging to measure, but to date, when it comes to taking responsibility, it's been really easy to pass the buck. And I know that AWS and Google have taken the brunt of that, but with CSRD and inbound legislation approaching, we feel now's a really good time to start talking about supply chain, workflows, and sustainability. And I'm going to let Jan-Henrik and Francois introduce themselves in a second. So Jan-Henrik from A&E Networks, if you want to give a little intro, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I work for A&E Networks UK. So we look after the A&E channels, history, and CI brands across EMEA. And that is, of course, traditionally been linear channels, but recently there's more and more SVOD, D2C, all kinds of non-linear distribution. And one of the big projects we're working on in the moment, and this is relevant to this, is that we're going through a big technology renewal, moving our content supply chain into the cloud, onto new technology stack, new software. And as part of that, I think it's an important opportunity, or not just opportunity, obligation of ours to make sure that as we're redesigning, reinventing our supply chain on a new technology stack, that we are making the right choices when it comes to sustainability, that we are built right from the start of the design, that our carbon footprint is part of the decision-making process, both when our workflows are designed, but also the vendors which we're choosing to work with. And that's what brings me to this meeting today. Francois?
Thanks, Jan.
Hi.
And on the other side of the table, Francois, over to you.
Hi. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Henrik, for the intro. So I'm Francois Polazek. I'm Sustainability Director at Tuxedo. Just give you insights about what we do. We're a video solutions provider. We've been working for more than 18 years now with broadcasters and operators around the world, creating video apps for them. We're a global company. We've got about 17 offices, so quite widespread, which obviously can be an issue with our own measurements sometimes. But in terms of operations, we're working with large tier one operators and broadcasters, as well as smaller customers through a SaaS platform that we have. And in this way, we're here to obviously trying to figure out how to help those customers every step of the way with their video strategy. And more importantly, for a few years now, we embarked on our own sustainability journey, looking at our own ESG/corporate KPIs, which was obviously a necessary step before being able to advise our customers and also partners, technology vendors in our ecosystem on what can be done in sustainability from a more external perspective, right? So moving on from the methodology and the reporting towards the actual reductions on different parts of the ecosystem when it comes to sustainability, which I am focusing on now.
Very good, thank you. And so Tuxedo, you are a supplier, but also technically an operator, and A&E, you're on the other side of the table, you're a broadcaster and a distributor. And I think we're coming at this from slightly different angles because, well, we have different perspectives to this. And before we go into looking at the supply chain and workflows, we should probably talk about progress to date. Now, my observation is large companies have typically started with their scope 1 and scope 2s, controlling the things that they have direct control of. And Jan, from A&E's perspective, can you just summarize broadly what A&E are doing about sustainability today?
Yes, I'm happy to. Talking about the scopes, we don't really have scope 1. So our focus is on scope 2, and scope 3 is, I think, where for us it gets really interesting, because it's our business we work a lot with service providers and other partners and platforms. So a lot of our emissions are done by other companies on our behalf. But as a company, we're at the moment we're in the middle of a consultancy with a company called Climate Partners, who help us to fully understand what our current impact is across all of EMEA of our activities. And that is, of course, that is part of our corporate strategy, the choice that we made last year. That is something we need to focus on, but it's also supported by an ERG that we have in-house. So it's an employee resource group, the green team that's really driving this agenda forward and has created an internal culture that sustainability is important to us, and that we as a company need to start doing more on that. I mean, there's a few, while we're waiting on the Climate Partner report, we're not sitting on our hands. There are already a number of things we've done. For example, we're offsetting all of our corporate flights. We've chosen to travel by train rather than plane. And across EMEA, we're also choosing locations that are easy accessible. So we're having, rather than have everyone come to London, we're having meetings in Munich or in Amsterdam, where it's easier for people to get from across Europe to get to by train, if those meetings indeed are needed. We've done things around the office, around reusable cutlery and things like that, and green energy. So we've done a number of very practical things, hands-on, and while at the same time really trying to capture and understand the whole data set across a business, where we're using how much, and then to move on to the next steps of recommendations and what we can do over the next few years.
And as a supplier, Francois, do you see different pressures? I know that you personally take responsibility for sustainability within Excedo, but do you feel a lot of pressure from your customers, and therefore does that change the angle at which you're approaching this?
We definitely do, through prospects as well, through RFPs, which I'm sure we'll tackle soon enough. But in our case of carbon emissions that we are creating on behalf of our customers, we're seeing more and more traction through the CDP reporting, which we have done voluntarily since last year, since we committed to the science-based targets framework for emission reduction, which is, I think, absolutely mandatory for any technology vendor or broadcaster or any media organization to look at. I know there are a few others out there, but I see it completely, unimportant to look at others when this is kind of like the most important framework. So we've made that decision to choose the best of breed that's out there, and through CDP, I think it's extremely useful to have this kind of reporting, because it's all just accountable, right, compared to other audits, which kind of just give you a badge, like potentially B Corp or EcoVadis, which are great in a way to see where you are. But in terms of making us collaborating with each other and improve the methodology on how do we report, right? So we've had only one customer who asked us to report, because we were part of their top 200 supplier in emissions. Last year, we now have, I believe, 4 this year for our customers, right? Which is a huge increase when you think about it. And it's not easy to report, because of course the questions are the same, but they're asking you on how do you intend to collaborate. They're asking you for quite accurate data on what are your emissions. And for us, being a technology provider that provides both services for development hours, but as well as licenses, right? How do you calculate the emission for license for development framework, if we're licensing? No, this is tricky. Luckily, we are all working under the CDP, and this is something that we can all agree on moving forward.
Yeah, and listening to this, I worry about things like, what is the driver? Clearly, you have a driver from a personal and a company perspective, but also you've got a driver driven by your customers' demands. But of course, we then have costs, and the bottom line is always very important, right? So that common language is very important. What about standards and governance? And I mentioned CSRD, you mentioned CDP. I know we've spoken about science-based targets before. How is that pushing you to take action here?
I mean, I can take that one. I mean, as you said, I think, and what we are recommended to any technology vendor broadcasters that want to start their journey is to look at the best of breed standards, right? I mean, this is the only way to navigate through this complex ecosystem, is to actually look at things that already exist, don't reinvent the wheel, and see what your customers are already asking you to do. The way we started our journey was by just looking at the EcoVadis, which is an ESG audit. We've taken that, so we didn't score really well, but that gave us information on where we needed to be. With the CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is that report that asks you to report on your progress towards the Science-Based Target Initiative. Again, if we hadn't taken it, then the customers are asking us to report on it. We can't would have forced us to get there. It's not easy. I think all of those methodologies are not really adequate for the media sector. The Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which they all rely on, was primarily designed for the heavy industry, not for the service sector. So we have to come up with high-level estimates, unfortunately, and we have to use that and kind of like adapt it to our own way. But because there is this relationship between a supplier and customer asking each other things, and also the supplier, we feel like our duty is to collaborate with the customer to provide them the best information possible, right? And this is not a competition. This is not somewhere where we have to give the best compared to our competitors. It's about us working together to actually get there.
And having sold technology to broadcasters in the past, I suppose I'm a little bit cynical of that statement. I like the idea that we'll all work together, but Jan, you've got to look at the bottom line, right? And you need to squeeze your vendors and make sure they're delivering the projects as fast as they can. So how do you make that balance? In fact, do you even have a budget? Do you even have a budget for this stuff?
We don't. In the moment in operations in my team, we don't have a budget for sustainability, but really a lot of it, especially in the supply chain, I think a lot of it is, or if you create efficiencies, you're reducing your carbon footprint. So it's a win-win. And those would be, I guess, would be the easy wins. We've started including sustainability questions in our RFPs, the same as we're asking about cybersecurity and other certifications and protocols. So in part, to signal to potential suppliers that this is something that's important to us. But I think when we are selecting vendors to work with, of course, there's the cold hard numbers, there's the technology, the SLAs and all of that. But what's really important to us is partnership as well. That it is a company that we're on the same wavelengths with, that have similar values. And I think sustainability falls into that to a degree, that we want to work with partners who are interested in a long-term partnership, don't just want to make a quick buck out of us. And we don't want to squeeze them to a point that they don't make any profit from us, because then they don't want to work with us. So we're interested in a long-term partnership that both parties benefit from. And then when it comes to improving, or to sustainability first, I think what we need is more transparency. When we get KPI reports and FinOps dashboards and all kinds of reporting from our vendors around different KPI targets, sustainability or carbon consumption of our activity needs to be part of that. It's transparently shared. What are they doing on our behalf? And then you can start, as part of your monthly KPI meetings or whatever performance management processes you have in place, so working on improvements and making sure that we're not just asking them to reduce the carbon footprint and pass on all this savings to us, that there's something in it for both partners, that we're incentivizing them to make improvements. And so we have to come up with some clever mechanisms in the KPIs, how to reduce our carbon consumption, but those savings to be shared between both parties.
And it's a nice, mature approach to take. And I think traditionally people were beaten up on the price more, or how fast can you deliver something. But I think you're right. We all have to work together on this. And a lot of what you were touching on there revolves around your requirements as a company. And Francois, you already touched on the increasing number of questions surrounding sustainability in RFPs. Is there an interesting opportunity for everybody to work together to actually define the focus of the sustainability questions in RFPs? How could we go about doing that? And maybe Jan, maybe you can.
Yes. Yeah, I think service providers are telling us what the kind of things they think they can do, or what kind of questions, guidance they need from us. I think it definitely needs to be worked on collaboratively, because for most of us, it is still relatively new. So there's no long established processes that we've been following as companies for 10 years or so. So I think we need to work together on what is sensible, how do we get the best out of each other? How do we challenge each other to do better? Because there's one thing, for example, a lot of times we talk about SLAs and availability and redundancy. We need 4 or 5 nines in the SLA on service uptime. Now that comes with a lot of backups and redundancy systems and things on standby just in case something goes wrong. So I think the challenge from the vendors could be to broadcasters, to content owners, should be, okay, we can be more sustainable, but that means less systems on standby and more redundancy. Therefore, the SLAs we can promise you are no longer 5 nines, but maybe 4 or 3. Having those grown-up discussions and then us as a business say, okay, is that a compromise? Is that something we're willing to make because it saves us X amount of tons of carbon per year? I think those are the kind of discussions we need to have.
Got it.
And then, and adding on to that, I think we should move away from those questions into RFP just to penalize vendors that haven't started their journey. What if we had those questions that actually don't show a path forward, right? When we work with smaller startups and ask them about their IT security policies, they haven't really done much about that, but actually we tell them, look, it's okay if you haven't really started. This would give you really good insights on where to go. What if it could be the same with sustainability, right? I think it would be difficult to get to a level of standardization from a global perspective. Whether you are in APAC or North America, you will have different standards. Perhaps in North America, ISO will be more prominent compared to Europe or APAC. But there are things that we could call best of breed when it comes to reporting frameworks, or things that would be absolutely necessary to get you started on your journey, right? I know there is another panel today from the DPP, and I think their program is really good in the way that it just gathered the most important thing that media organizations should be looking at, right? So this could be a great start of saying, these are the kind of things that we want you to look at. Please insert them in the RFP. If you haven't started, here are the resources to actually get there, right? And as long as you commit to get there in a certain time frame, then that's fine. And then we are onboarding more people onto the journey. I think that's the most important today, that we go away from the complexity of all these methodologies and actually get things to reduce, right? Because that's the most important, and then further educate.
Barbara dropped a question in the chat referencing supplier community and what their reaction is to this, and what the business interest is of getting on the sustainability pathway. From my perspective, like Humans Not Robots is about sustainability and helping people measure and understand. So obviously I'm backing that horse and it's very interesting. But I think from a personal perspective, it's good to support working together on these challenges. And I actually think from a financial perspective and from a requirement perspective, it shouldn't be adversarial. We should all be working together on projects anyway. So this should be a little bit of a shoe-in of, actually, we want to start focusing on the sustainability side. And I think, that helps move all of this forwards. And I think from every side of the table, that's a good thing. So
as a supplier, I just want to add that, from my personal perspective, the business case for sustainability is, already proven, right? From an investor perspective, any investor will start to look at ESG KPI from even a more moral perspective, I think that, the way we all collaborate together and we don't necessarily talk about, investment in that aspect is very important, right? No one will close the door to you when you talk about doing something for the greater good. From an audience and user engagement perspective, there are so many opportunities to engage there. And, us as a supplier to build video experiences, this is for us a great way to expand, right? And I know it's just a bit outside of workflow, but there is definitely a business case, right? And workflows don't have to be, measuring your cloud usage or is it transcoding, being more sustainable or not. It could be from a broader standpoint where you look at other workflows of a media company or media operations, like advertising, like the way they manage the content from a sustainable standpoint, right? All of that can be explored, and it's incredibly rich in terms of resources and opportunities. So I think to me that the business case is there, right? Both for a supplier where we can, help differentiate or customers differentiate themselves, and as well as us.
Yeah, and I would like to add as well that in this scenario we are the customer of the technology vendors, but of course we've got customers, other companies as well. We've got marketing or advertising companies that we're seeing more and more that they're asking us what we're doing. Platforms that we're distributing our channels to, they're asking us, they're interested. So I think thinking positively, there's a momentum building that everyone is starting to ask each other and starting to each other accountable. I mean, our shareholders are Hearst and Sky. They're both very heavily interested in this as well. I think Sky is is leading in this field in the UK, and they're asking us in the board meetings, what are A&E specifically, what are you doing? And I think that those sort of holding each other accountable and encouraging each other and sharing how to solve these issues together, that needs to continue at every level.
Yeah. A little bit earlier, we talked about a common language and we talked about various different regulations. Thinking more closely about the media supply chain and what are we trying to measure? Jan, you're currently starting to go through cloud transformation. You're moving things from legacy on-prem, I think is probably a fair way to describe that.
Yes.
What are you wanting to measure, and how, what are we looking at here, and how easy should that be?
How easy it should be. It should be easy for us, so that, I mean, we get, like I said, we got financial dashboards, we got KPI reports from on throughput of how many assets are stored where, how many have been delivered in this workflow, that workflow, and some of it quite granular reporting. The same should be available for your carbon consumption on each workflow, so that you're knowing if you're having a new launch of a new product and that requires 500 hours of content to be restored from the archive, transcoded, and then delivered out, that we know, apart from the cost of the transcoding and the egress and all of that, we also know what is our carbon footprint for this. And we should then also have the transparency that the vendors involved, what are they, where is that carbon coming from? Are they already offsetting? Are they using green energy and things like that? And there's some vendors that is available, but not everyone. And like you said earlier, not just same common standards and using the same terminology and language. So there's a danger of people getting confused on how good it actually is what they're doing. And I think that all of us, there's also a huge element of education, they're doing the difference between offsetting and net zero and carbon neutral. And so there's those are terms. I think some people are maybe not clear enough what the differences are.
Yeah. Okay. And what about setting targets? Is that something that Excedo started doing?
We have set up
So sorry. Yeah, you said you've done your CDP, and as part of that, you've got targets. So I'm thinking more specifically around your media supply chain.
We have, so as part of the SBTI, where we have our target towards 2030 and 2050 own emissions, by 2027, we do have to convert a certain amount of our supplier and customers to the Science Based Targets initiative. They have to set up their own targets as well. The reason why we need to convert our customers is because they are using our products, right? Which is fairly minimal, given that they are using our product, which is a SaaS platform. It's only a web portal, so the usage is minimal. But when it comes to reselling hardware, there is obviously a larger amount there. Then suppliers, I mean, our scope 3 emissions are 96.7% of our total emissions. And when it comes to our purchase goods and services, it's about 40%, and use of sold products is about another 40% for the hardware we're reselling. So obviously that's pretty much all of our emissions. Business travel actually only accounts for 10% of our scope 3, which is not a huge amount when you think about it, especially for the size of our operations. So we do have these targets, and again, that's an added layer of complexity on how do you actually get to engage with your suppliers, because that comes from the stationery from the Toronto office up to AWS UZ, right? And one or the other would be more easily accessible. And how do you actually get that framework to be set up on engaging with them is a whole other discussion, right? So ideally we get to harmonize all these processes and actually get to reduce things. But the question is how, right?
Yeah. A question's been put in the window about practical examples. Are there any practical examples of adjusting workflows to improve sustainability?
That's something I'm just very quickly, because I know we're up on time. So yeah, there's some insight as a technology provider or broadcaster. Definitely with our cloud provider, AWS, right? It's something we'll be looking at on a very regular basis. Although the data we get from them is 6 months backwards, which is quite frustrating. They have, incredible technology and services, and they are quite involved with, through the climate pledge and through various sustainability teams that they have at our disposal to reduce emissions. So through the usage of different CPUs, for instance, using Graviton instead of Intel, in that case, we are able to reduce energy consumption of our cloud usage. That's one of them, and I'm sure on the media chain that there is more, but for us it's a more tangible example, being working directly at the end of the food chain of media.
I think we got 2 minutes remaining, so I think we need to start wrapping up here. One thing we didn't touch on was like the social aspects and diversity. And I think that's important to all three of us here, and hopefully more broadly as well. Any thoughts on that?
I think having a diverse and inclusive makeup in the company, having a culture that is clear, that opinions and views from different backgrounds are appreciated to contribute. I think that creates a culture where people can speak up and feel empowered to say, okay, what are we doing as a company in this field? I think that's how our ERG has come to be. There's this group of volunteers from across the business who are the green team that are driving this forward. So I think that is, for me, is the connection with this diversity, that you're sort of creating a diverse culture and environment where people can bring up subjects that are maybe not in their job spec.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like it. And in the last 30 seconds each, what's the plan for the next 6 months? So, Francois, where will Acedo be, and how will you be flexing your muscles?
So we're hard working on launching our sustainable marketplace that we announced at last IBC, which will be a place for evaluating technology vendors based on their own ESG and corporate journey towards sustainability, as well as looking at products that are gearing up towards sustainability, that are helping our customers with their own ESG targets or sustainability targets, as well as initiatives either run by Acedo. We have obviously our sustainable roundtable that was quite successful earlier this year, which will lead to potential co-innovation projects with customers, hopefully A&E and others.
Thank you. And from our side, we're completing our strategic review, and then again, the goal is that by the end of the year, we have a published target as a company, and the first phase to that is really understanding our data. That is the current phase we're in. So we're at the start of the journey, but the corporate goal is by the end of the year, we want to have a published target.
Amazing.
Well, That is, I'm afraid, all we have. Really, thank you, Kristen and Jan Hendrik and Francois. It's really, I think procurement, supply chain is a real target point to drive change because everybody wants to do business. And if sustainability metrics is how they're going to get business, then I think that helps drive it even more. So thank you so much for your insights, and we'll look forward to the developments in the coming months and years as well. Thank you.